All right, what's going on, guys? Simple Sports back with the next episode, and going to talk about some NFL stuff again today. So obviously we're in the off season. NBA is winding down to the last moments of the regular season. A couple of big games tonight: Thunder and the Heat. Um, that could have some implications for both teams for the playoffs. Also, the Cavs and the Knicks. Not necessarily that it's a big game in terms of like seeding or anything of that nature, other than Cleveland. Obviously, they need to get wins in order to not drop any further. But the Cavs are on TV, so that's obviously just a big deal in and of itself. But the NFL is kind of at a standstill at the moment. Not a whole lot going on. Free agency is kind of like the frenzy is over. The trades are still, I mean, obviously there's still trades and stuff to be had up until the season starts. But right now the NFL is at a bit of a standstill. Got the draft coming up in a couple of weeks. No real major news story. So I wanted to talk about the Kirk Cousins and Case Keenum, that whole switcheroo that the Vikings pulled, and the Denver Broncos obviously ended up getting Case Keenum. Vikings ended up with Kirk Cousins and the fully guaranteed contract. And I just want to talk about the two and why I think both teams may have made a mistake. Not necessarily that either quarterback is terrible or anything like that. I just don't think either one is quite what either team is looking for. But we'll go through it all and sort of talk about it. The big thing for me is if you look at their numbers, just raw data, right? They're actually not very dissimilar. Very similar pass accuracy, very similar in yards per attempt down the field, yards per completion, touchdown to interceptions, although Kirk Cousins had a few more of each. But nothing super drastic. He had almost double the amount of interceptions, which is a little alarming. But again, you have to look at circumstances in addition to numbers, and I think that's a mistake most people make, or a lot of people make, is they try to base everything solely off the numbers, and you just can't do that, right? And for example, you sort of would expect Case Keenum to have better numbers. Given the team he's on as a whole is far better than the Redskins. So you would think at least his negative, I guess if you want to call it, his negative statistics wouldn't be quite as low as Cousins. But like I said, they're fairly even. So, and Kirk Cousins is, if you look at every category by the letter, or I guess technically by the number, Kirk Cousins is a little better in most categories. Threw for more yards, threw for more touchdowns, had a couple more interceptions, although, like I said, that's a negative. Slightly better yards per completion, slightly better percentage. Like, everything is just slightly better than Case Keenum. And given the team he was on, you kind of, if you want to bump it up, say another, 10% or so, 5%, whatever you want to do, I guess if you want to sort of reward or not penalize him for the team he was on, because a lot of that has to do with what he's going through as far as his numbers. You're certainly more than welcome to do so. Like I said, I try to look at circumstances as much as I do the actual raw numbers. But I just want to go through each scenario and sort of lay out why I think each team, I don't want to, maybe saying made a mistake is a little strong. I just don't think they're going to get out of each guy what they think they are. And so let's look at the teams. If you look at the defensive side of the ball, I don't think there's any question or any point of contention. Minnesota had one of the best defenses. And if you just look at total points scored, I think they were first in the league, or I guess points scored against them. Technically, they were last, which, if you want to look at it that way, they were first, whatever. They're the best in the league, and Washington gave up the fifth most points in the league. So you would think there would be better numbers for Kirk Cousins in that because they're playing catch up a lot of the time. So you would think even just from sort of padding the stats in a way, he'd be a little bit better than he was. So that for me is a little bit concerning, right? Minnesota's a better team. Therefore, you would think Kirk Cousins' numbers would be a little bit lower than Case Keenum's. But they're right on par. But he also was playing from behind a lot, and so you would think, again, his numbers would be better than they are, and they're just not. That's just a observation that I had just looking at the numbers. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's the case. That's just what I interpret from it, right? They actually threw the ball as a total for the year about 20 less times than the Vikings did. But threw for more yards, more touchdowns, more interceptions as well. And like I said, that was almost double. So for me, do I expect Minnesota's quarterback play to be better, quote unquote? I do. I just don't think Cousins is necessarily better than Keenum. But his style of play and him as a person are obviously different. And the question is, does that lead to more wins, right? And it sort of made me think about what Colin Cowherd was talking about today as far as all-time great players, right? And the one he mentioned at the end was Steph Curry. Steph Curry has certainly changed the game of basketball, but is he necessarily one of the best players of all time? Now, I happen to think he is. How far up that list you want to put him, I don't know. That's yet to be determined. He's certainly an all-time great. He's one of the best shooters, if not the best shooter in basketball. And so my point is, you look at another guy like Anthony Davis, who's supremely talented, Russell Westbrook, James Harden. These guys are supremely talented, all-time talents in the game. But what are they doing to actually change the game? Their production may lead to more wins, but does it lead to more titles? Does it lead to them being a better team, or does it just lead to them having a better record throughout the regular season? And it's different in the NBA because the level of intensity is not necessarily there all year for the NBA, whereas in the NFL, all 16 games matter. 1 through 16, every single one of them is important. And in the NBA, it's just not the case. So that it's a little bit different looking at it in that dynamic, but sort of along the same lines. I don't know that adding Kirk Cousins, who I think is a slight upgrade from Case Keenum. But you know, I don't know if he changes their identity as a whole, right? What they gave up in Case Keenum and what they know about Case Keenum and who they know in Case Keenum, they pick up something totally different in Kirk Cousins. And what I see is someone who's a little more aggressive, a little more risky, may turn the ball over a little bit more. But by and large, to me, I don't think the jump up from Case Keenum to Kirk Cousins is that significant. And not to mention the pressure that's going to be on Cousins. It's Super Bowl or bust. They gave him a guaranteed contract. They got rid of a guy who got them to the NFC Championship. And they essentially, I mean, you don't get rid of him to go give someone almost $100 million guaranteed and expect to not improve, right? And the only improvement from NFC Championship is Super Bowl. They have to at minimum make it, or else I think this is going to be a failed transaction or a failed acquisition. And personally, I don't see that happening. The defense late last year wasn't quite what they needed it to be, particularly versus Philly. They were fine they were great for most of the year. And then against Philadelphia, it all fell apart. And it could have been just a thing, a case of the momentum just got out of control. We saw that, I think, with Tennessee and like New England. If you go back and watch the first half of that game, it was a fairly close game. It was actually fairly competitive. And then, I don't remember the exact play-by-play and all that stuff off the top of my head, but Tennessee had like a third down conversion that they got with Eric Decker that came back on a holding penalty when the game was like 7-3 or 7-0. It might have been 14-0. I know it wasn't much more than that. I think it was 7-0. They're driving down the field. They get a third down conversion, and it comes back on the holding call. They end up punting the ball, and then pretty much from that point forward, it was all she wrote. And it's a momentum killer because New England just scored. You're driving down the field to score. You just get a huge third down in the playoffs on the road in Foxborough. If you can go down and get a response there and get a touchdown, who knows how that's going to shake up the confidence of the team and the outcome of the game. And I think that was something similar in that Minnesota-Philly game where that pick six led to the touchdown, and it just, from that point forward, it was all downhill for the Eagles against the Vikings. And my question is, was that an anomaly? Was the defense a little overrated? I don't think so, personally. But you have to ask that question because all year long you were doing so well, and then in the biggest moment you shrink completely. It was an ugly performance, and it's a question I think that needs to be answered. Did they come up short in a moment, or did they show their true colors? Personally, I think it's somewhere in between. I think the defense is good. I don't think they're as great as people wanted them to be. They weren't, even of recent defenses, they aren't the Legion of Boom. They weren't even the Denver Broncos with the no-fly zone. Like, they're a really, really good defense, but are they that good? I don't know. I don't know how you give up almost 40 points to the Eagles. And granted, the Eagles have a very solid offense, don't get me wrong, but you can't claim, you can't lay claim to best defense or one of the best defenses in the league and then turn around and give up 40 points in the NFC Championship game. That just doesn't fly for me personally. Much like Jacksonville, you can't have or lay claim to be one of, if not the best defense in the league, and give up 40 to, even the Steelers. And now the Steelers have a high potent offense, obviously, but you can't give up 40 plus. And same thing with New England. You can't give up that kind of yardage and points in an AFC Championship game and also be labeled as one of the best defenses in the league, if not the best. So it concerns me, that part. And listen, they're a year older, which means they're more experienced, but they're also literally a year older. And you have to wonder, the tolls of an NFL season, you have to be able to repeat that next year. And so you're asking them to do the exact same thing, only one step further, which would be the Super Bowl. And is Kirk Cousins the guy to do that? I don't know. And we'll find out, obviously, over the course of the year. I don't personally think so. If anything, I think they'll take a step back this year. Maybe, I'm sure they'll make the playoffs. At least I'd like to believe that. I don't think they'll recede that much, but will they be the dominant team that they were last year? I don't think so. It's hard to do that once, let alone back-to-back years, and do better, and go to the Super Bowl. So, moving on to Denver, did they get their guy? I don't think they got their guy. I hope they don't feel like they got their guy. I don't have any confidence in Case Keenum personally, and, I don't like to say things like that because I don't want it to seem personal. It's not a personal thing as far as I don't like Case Keenum. I just look at it from a fan's perspective. I don't think Case Keenum is that guy. And I hope they're not putting all their eggs in the Case Keenum basket. If he is simply a bridge to the next guy, then, okay, fine. It's a rickety, shaky bridge, in my opinion. And unfortunately, I feel like it's a waste. If he's there for, say, 2 years, that defense won't be what they are currently. And they're already not what they used to be. You have to take that in consideration. You give a guy a contract like that. Is he there to be a mentor and a vet to the guy that they draft? Who knows? But there's reports that they aren't going to draft a quarterback, depending on who's available, I suppose. So what exactly is he there for? I think he was a desperate reach, is what it looks like to me, because I don't see him. The team as a whole is a downgrade from Minnesota. So do you expect Case to pick up his level of play to carry this team further? I don't see that happening. I think he played last year about as well as he could play. I think he had sort of a Matt Ryan, Cam Newton-esque year that was an outlier, and I think we've seen the best of Case Keenum in Minnesota. And then on top of that, Case in Denver certainly, I think, has a harder path to success given the division that he's in with Kansas City, who I'm never really sold on, but they will certainly be in contention for the division title. They're not a bad team. I just don't think they're a Super Bowl contender, as some people every year seem to want to make them. They're certainly a division contender for sure. And you have a Chargers team who's always seems to underachieve, but they're certainly competitive every year. And you have a Raiders team who no one knows anything about what they will be next year. You know, they went from a sleeper Super Bowl contender, or definitely a deep playoff run AFC Championship in 2016 to, and obviously Derek Carr got hurt, to largely irrelevant in 2017. And then now they have John Gruden, and they're making some moves with the roster there, but no one knows what they're going to be. They're pretty much starting from scratch. And meanwhile, Cousins just needs to worry about the Packers. The Vikings really have one contender in their division. It's the Packers. I've got zero respect for the Lions as any type of contender. I think they're a solid average team, someone that's going to disappoint a lot of fans. They're going to disappoint a lot of teams because they're going to get a lot of wins that, you know, against teams that probably should beat them or need to beat them in a particular week. And they'll, you know, Matt Stafford is no slouch. He's just not that guy. He doesn't have any signature win of note. And, you know, the team as a whole, again, they're solid. They're a 500 team. But I don't think they're going to contend for the division, and I don't think the Bears are quite there yet. I do like what they're doing, and I do think Trubisky is going to take a step forward, not a giant step forward, but a step forward is a step forward. And I do expect them to be competitive next year as well. I just not maybe playoff level team, right? And not to mention that the supporting cast, at least on paper in Minnesota, is better from top to bottom than Denver's. And Green Bay's for that matter. Green Bay just has Aaron Rodgers, and you know that's a game changer. So overall, I don't think either team will make significant improvements to their record or last year's outcome. I fully expect the Vikings to be somewhere close to where they finished last year in terms of record and making the playoffs. And I'm confident the Broncos will be better, because Case Keenum is a competent quarterback. I don't think he's certainly not a game changer to me, but he's certainly competent. He can get the job done. He's not some bust, right? I'm just not sold that they'll make the playoffs, much less contend for anything with Case Keenum. And like I said, the Vikings, I do think they'll make the playoffs, but it's going to be hard to replicate what you did last year in terms of getting to the NFC Championship with expectations to make it to the Super Bowl. Keep in mind, they got lucky to make it to that game with the Stephon Diggs play. It was a great play on their part, but it was also a terrible play on the defense's part. That's just a lucky play, and that's fine. You need that on your side. Every Super Bowl winner at some point throughout the year has luck on their side. So I'm not discrediting them for getting the win. I'm just saying, keep that in mind. It wasn't like they were blowing people away in the playoffs, you know. And then, like I said, they got blown out by Philly in that NFC Championship game, and it was all she wrote from there. A lot of this is going to change once the draft is over, obviously, but as of this very moment, that's where I stand. I don't think either team – I think if you want to measure the difference between last year and this year, I certainly think the Broncos will have the bigger improvement, but it's not really hard to do so considering they were so bad last year. I don't think Minnesota is necessarily going to improve. I don't think they're going to necessarily drop off, at least if they do, not by much, maybe a game or two as far as their record is concerned. I do think they still make the playoffs. I just don't think they're going to go much farther than making the playoffs. So that's all I want to talk about for now. Just a quick thing I wanted to touch on with the NFL and that whole scenario. Obviously, as I've said previously, once we get closer to the draft, we'll do some different things, talk about some more NBA stuff tonight. I'm getting ready to go watch the Thunder play the Heat, see how that game turns out. I'll probably talk about that and the rest of the NBA, what we see tonight. I'll talk about that stuff tomorrow. But until then, I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.